Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to Medieval Church History. I'm Teresa Holman, and with me is Father Michael Witt. Welcome, Father.
Thank you, Teresa.
It's good to be here, and we're in show number 23.
23, yeah.
And I'm going to introduce the title of this one,
Okay.
Cross My Heart and Hope to Die, the Military Orders.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, salvation is your objective.
Yes.
Then you're looking forward to dying, hopefully on the battlefield, hopefully having had the opportunity to go to confession first, because that was the caveat involved in there. But yeah. So we'll be looking at two of the orders. There were actually several, but the two major orders in the Holy Lands, we'll be looking at their history today, those being the Knights Templar and then the Hospitallers. And before we do that, last time around we talked a little bit about bibliography. Where can we find out more information about this? And so I'd like to take a couple minutes and just talk to everyone about some possible sources. And I think in a sense that's even more important, because there's so much about the Knights Templar that is so misunderstood. The other night I was talking with some of the deacon candidates about the very thing, and I said, there are over 100,000 websites on just dealing with the Knights Templar, and they laughed. They said, oh no, it can't be. And I said, look, some of them were online, and I said, Google Knights Templar and see what you get. And a couple guys did over 1 million websites, and a bunch of them claiming that they're the modern-day version and all this. So it's important for us to get the actual facts written down behind all of that stuff.
Very important.
Yeah.
That's a current topic.
And also the Crusades itself. The Crusades are a very contentious issue. One of the recent books that came out 2 years ago, I'll say some more things about this, called The First Crusade by Thomas Asbridge. His subtitle says, A New History, The Roots of Conflict Between Christianity and Islam. Well, this whole clash of civilizations thing and all that, that's all very debatable amongst scholars. And so before we jump into that and draw everything black and white, I think we need to, like I say, get some other sources and look at this a little bit more objectively. So here are some possibilities.
Great.
Okay. One that probably most people won't go to, and understandably, it's Volume 5 of the Cambridge Medieval History series. It's entitled Conquest of Empire and Papacy. Probably you won't have it in your own home library, because these are reference books that are found in major libraries with good historical sources. They're very expensive. They tend to run between $60 and $100 a volume. And, you've got 10 volumes or so. So libraries are where you're going to find these, unless you find them in a used bookstore or something like that. But that particular one covers the Crusades, and does so very thoroughly, has some very good scholars behind it, but being scholars that sometimes not writing to the general audience. And so the Cambridge series, whether it be modern or medieval or even the ancient, can be pretty dry as dust unless you're, mining and trying to get some little gold nuggets out. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that as the first one to go to, but it's there, and it's available in your public libraries as well as the great university libraries. Another one that is available, and probably a lot of our listeners have his work in their own personal library, and that is Warren Carroll in his series, which I understand he's just recently come up with yet another volume, so we're all excited about that. I picked that up. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but he's still in there writing. This one is the Glory of Christendom, and again he covers the Crusades. He is readable. He's a very interesting writer and a solid Catholic historian. So I would really recommend, if you're interested in something on the Crusades, he would be a good one to turn to also. Another book that's I believe out of print right now, but you can pick it up at book fairs and things like that, is Anne Fremantle's The Age of Faith. Anne Fremantle has done a lot of really good historical work, especially in the patristics era. But this Age of Faith deals with the Middle Ages, and it's a coffee table style book. So it's got a lot of pictures, maps, very engaging narrative, and it's fun to read.
Okay.
And that's a good one, too. Another one that's available, just was published in 2003, is Angus McKay's The Atlas of Medieval Europe. And you can buy that at any of the big box bookstores that are around. Runs about $25, $30. Full of maps and lots of good narrative also. So that's a nice little volume. And go back to another one that we had talked about before early in our program was Brian Tierney.
Oh, right.
You know, his book came out in 1970, Western Europe in the Middle Ages. That second volume was in 1970, but it's still got some good stuff, and he covers the Crusades succinctly and very interestingly. If you want an Arab perspective on this, Karen Armstrong's Islam, A Short History. She is obviously not sympathetic to the Crusades, but she has a good chapter that covers this material, as well as I'd mentioned before, Reza Aslan, No God But God, The Origins, Evolution, and Future of Islam, also speaks of the Crusades, so again, from an Islamic point of view. And some others, a little on the more personal level, you could glean a couple chapters out of Joseph Dalmas' 1967 book, The Seven Medieval Kings, and he does some of those kings are on crusades. So from a biographical point of view, that's a kind of interesting book. And then Amy Kelly zeroes in on Eleanor of Aquitaine in her book, Eleanor Aquitaine and the Four Kings. That came out in 1978, and we're going to talk about Eleanor of Aquitaine a little bit down the line. She was really bawled out by Bernard of Clairvaux at one point.
Okay.
Put in her place. She's a naughty little girl, actually. Crusades themselves, here's some other possibilities. There's one that came out in 1988 called The Divine Campaigns, and it's a time frame from Time Life books. Again, it's a coffee table book, but again, it's got a lot of nice pictures, maps, charts, and engaging narrative.
Okay.
Goes into things that you normally don't think about. Some of the things we'll be talking about, like for instance, or some of the things we have talked about, the training of a young squire when he comes to a castle. What are the kind of things that he does? What is his day like? They go into some real detail on that kind of stuff. Does a whole composition on going on pilgrimage, and what does that entail? What routes do you take? Those sorts of things. So it's kind of fascinating, and it's kind of contemporary in a sense too, because just a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was in Lourdes, and while I was there, I didn't meet this woman, but one of the other Christian brothers who was with us did, and it was a woman from Italy, from northern Italy, and she was on the last part of a pilgrimage. Now this is a real pilgrimage. We went by plane and train and automobile, but she walked.
Oh my goodness.
All the way from Compostela. I don't know how she got to Compostela, but she walked from Compostela all the way to Lourdes, and that was her pilgrimage for this year.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's something. And as this brother was telling me about this woman and all, I was just thinking to myself, that's how they did it back in the old days. And boy, what a religious experience that she would have had. Well, anyway, that's the Divine Campaigns, and strongly recommend Thomas Madden's book, The Crusades, an Illustrated History. Or you could pick up his concise history of the Crusades, which doesn't have as many pictures in it. But his illustrated history is also a coffee table style book. It's got a lot of wonderful pictures, very engaging narrative. He writes in it. He's got a number of other authors that do chapters for him. Toward the end of the book, there's a wonderful chronology that takes it year by year, what happens with each of the Crusades, and then his bibliography is pretty complete also, so it can lead you to some other really substantial books. So I would really recommend that one if you're just getting started into the Crusades. Either his concise history or his illustrated history would be really good.
Great.
And then when we get into the Templars themselves, there's Piers Paul Reed, and he has a very substantial history of the Templars, which is very good. And then the number one that I would recommend to people is Peter Parkner. I always recommend this to our deacon candidates and to our seminarians, because this book not only gives you the skinny on who the Templars were and why they were suppressed, but also goes on beyond that and talks about the myth of the Templars. The title is The Knights Templar and Their Myth, and that has to do with the mixing of that Templar story in with the coming of Freemasonry and all the sorts of things that evolve all the way down to today.
Right.
You know, and there is more garbage out about the Templars than there is real stuff. Unfortunately, you can turn on the History Channel, you might get a really good presentation of the Knights Templar, and then right after that, they're going to have something that is just real schlock. You know, so if you want to know something about these guys, I would go to Peter Parkner and rely on him. He's pretty darn good. And then there's another book also by it's on the Knights of Malta, which of course are the Hospitallers by a different name, and this is by H.J.A. Sire. Came out in 1994. It is again a coffee table format, so it's a large book, lots of pictures, but it's going to tell you about this fascinating religious order that we should all know more about. You know, they're just really something. So, anyway, those are some books. And before we jump into today, I want to give you a little bit of just a couple sentences out of the book that I started with as a warning. Okay.
Okay.
You know, a priest friend of mine had used the term of having a Catholic nose. And a Catholic nose is when you're reading something or hearing something or seeing something on television and it smells wrong. It just doesn't smell right. And so we need to have that refined Catholic nose. I think that's one of the great advantages of Catholic radio is that we help to instill that in our Catholic population, in people in general. And we do that for ourselves also. But let me just read you a couple sentences out of this book. This is Thomas Asbridge, The First Crusade, A New History, The Roots of Conflict Between Christianity and Islam. As I say, I've got some problem with the title to begin with, but listen to some of the things he says about medieval Christianity in his introduction.
Okay.
He says, Europe's devotion to Christianity can be traced back to the 4th century CE, when the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great embraced Christian dogma, injecting this small-scale Eastern Mediterranean sect into the lifeblood of Rome. I have a little question mark I put in the thing. What about the first 300 years?
Right.
What about all those martyrs? You know, what about, I mean, that's the whole patristic period. What, you know, that
didn't exist.
Right, and that really caused my Catholic nose to be out of joint when I read that. And then I went over to the next page,
Okay.
and it didn't help my nose any. And he says this: in a strange quirk of history, the earthly power that had overcome the execution of Christ, that had overseen the execution of Christ, now catapulted his teachings on the world stage. It's a strange quirk of history. That's a secular way of saying providence.
Right. Okay.
Okay, there goes my nose.
Definitely.
Down a little bit further, another, he says, in the 11th century, the full pantheon of human experience, birth, love, anger, death. Pantheon. That's an interesting term to use. Pantheon. That's a temple where all the gods are worshipped. Okay, so he's going to use that in terms of the context of the full pantheon of human experience. That's strange use. Is governed by Christian dogma, and the cornerstone of this system of belief was fear. I thought it was love.
Love, right.
Yeah, well, okay, maybe I got it wrong. It says medieval minds were plagued by one overwhelming anxiety, the danger of sin. In death, it was believed every human soul would be judged. Purity would bring everlasting paradise, but an eternity of gruesome torment awaited those polluted by sin. This universal obsession, shared by kings and peasants alike, shaped all custom, morality, and law. I think that's incredibly overplaying the situation. And so here I find myself just here in the first chapter, the introduction to this book, having my Catholic nose out of joint, saying, I don't think I am coming from the same worldview, Weltanschauung, that this guy is. So as I read the rest of this book, I'll do that with my antenna up.
Yeah.
So I have not only a good Catholic nose, but I've got good Catholic antennae too. You know. So anyway, as we go through reading all of these books, it's important, it's incumbent on us to read them with a jaundiced eye. You've got to be very careful. There are people out there who have interesting points of view, and they're trying to sell those points of view.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now on to Cross My Heart and Hope to Die. Before we get into the next 4 crusades, and they're disastrous crusades,
Right.
we've had the one good one now, we need to introduce 2 of the big players of this era, and they're 2 incredible people. They just really stand out. One of them is a knight by the name of Hugh de Payne, and the other is Brother Gerard.
Okay.
Okay, let's start out with Hugh de Payne first. This was a fellow who was inspired by the First Crusade, went on the crusade, arrived in Jerusalem, and having finished, he's from France, and having finished off the First Crusade, unlike 80% of his confreres who had either died or abandoned the cause on the way to Jerusalem,
Right.
remember only 20% made it there, and unlike that other large percentage that finally said, well, okay, we've done our job, we're going back home, okay, Hugh, on the other hand, decided to stay in the Holy Land, and he and a number of other people recognized the danger in the Holy Land for the pilgrims, and that it was just physically dangerous for pilgrims who are now free to come to Jerusalem, but they had to travel that very dangerous route from Joppa to Jerusalem, and a land route. And so he decides to stay behind, and some of his fellow friends join him in acting as bodyguards for these pilgrims. The Muslims would be harassing the road between Joppa and Jerusalem, and so he's going to join with some of the other knights in protecting these unarmed pilgrims. And so others begin joining him. They decided that this had to be a holy endeavor, that these pilgrims, sort of like that woman at Lourdes, you know, are taking considerable risk and putting themselves out for a holy endeavor, and so these knights decided to do the same thing. And so we have the seeking for personal salvation through pilgrimage protection, basically. King Baldwin II is very encouraged, and anytime you can get a knight to stay in the Holy Land and basically stay there for life, you're going to, you want to thank this guy.
Everything you can.
Everything you can. And so King Baldwin II encouraged Hugh and his companions and gave them prime real estate in Jerusalem in order to establish their headquarters. And they do that at the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque is handed over to them, since the Muslims weren't going to be using that mosque for a while. And they established themselves as they called themselves the Poor Knights of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The reason for this is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is located on Temple Mount, very close to where the Dome of the Rock is. And, of course, the Dome of the Rock is called the Dome of the Rock because there's a dome over a rock. It's a great big huge rock that's been there since time immemorial and is mentioned in either First or Second Chronicles as the place that King David has decided to build his temple, which of course Solomon will build. And even to this day, we are convinced, most of us are convinced, that this is the floor of the Holy of Holies. And so that's why it's called the Temple of Solomon. The Templars' seal, their coat of arms, shows two knights riding on one horse. It is a sign of their poverty. In actuality, it was probably the other way around. The order probably provided 2 horses for every knight, since that was the only practical way to do things like that. Anyway, there was a real breakthrough that came in for these men who were living personal holy lives, living in community on this headquarters, and the breakthrough came in 1128 when Hugh de Payne traveled to France, to his home country, and there at the Council of Troyes presented his order, recommending his order to the church. And he sees this now, and this is a very different kind of an order. I mean, in the past, religious orders were like Benedictines, set up to pray and work. And their idea of work was to, copy out things in a scriptorium or to take care of the herb garden or something like that. But he's going to pray and work, but his prayer is his prayer will be the prayer of the church, but his work is going to be literally military protection of the Holy Land. And gathered there at Troyes are going to be mainly Burgundian bishops and a papal legate, and also abbots. And one of the abbots is going to include Abbot Bernard of Clairvaux. And Bernard is very enthusiastic of this, and he offers to write for Hugh de Payne the religious rule for the Templars, which is very close to the rule of his own order. And so they're set up along the lines of the Cistercians. And now you have a very odd mix of this military order, which is going to be a mix of the First Estate and the Second Estate. First Estate being the religious, okay? Second Estate being the nobles. And so it's a blending of the two, which is quite unique in history. Well, 1 year later, in 1129, the Pope Honorius II, who has himself been involved with military campaigns before. In fact, 1 year earlier, he had been defeated by Roger II, one of those darn Norman Sicilians. He recognizes the order, but he does more than that. He puts the order under a special papal protection. This will be his order, as opposed to most of the other religious orders at the time were founded and then received bulls of approbation, recognition from the papacy. This order is going to receive a very special relationship with the papacy. And as a result of that, there will be particular obligations that the Templars have to the Pope directly, and at the same time also certain privileges that they'll receive. For instance, they'll be able to have their own priests. Those priests will be able to celebrate the sacraments within the confines of the headquarters or the various houses of the Templars. They'll be able to do their own fundraising, to solicit funds, and funds begin flowing very rapidly into the order, and so it's going to be very expensive to put these knights up. We talked last time around about the logistics of going on campaign, and we were just talking about how much grain was necessary. Now start thinking about how are you going to pay for that grain. unless you go around stealing it from people, scavenging, the chances are you're going to have to buy that grain, and so it's going to be expensive. And then even just housing knights is going to be expensive. So you have that. Also, there's a fresh flow of recruits who come in, and finally in 1139, Pope Innocent II gives full constitutional approval to the Knights Templar, praising their deeds, and in his approval mentions again that their own personal salvation comes when they are killed in battle. And uses this term. It's a little embarrassing for us today as we try to be multicultural, but he said the term, he said that they consecrated their hands to God in the blood of the unbelievers. As over the top as that seems to us today,
right.
The other side was using the same terminology.
Right.
In fact, they still do.
I was just going to say, it sounds right.
Yeah.
The jihadist.
Yeah, definitely. You can go to any website, But basically, they found themselves being praised more and more for their aggressive action rather than their defensive action. And so with time, the Knights Templar take on a more aggressive role within the Holy Land. Okay, and so they'll be used not only to defend pilgrims, but also to be used in military operations, some of which are defensive, some of which are offensive. Mm-hmm. They are robed in a white mantle, which is the habit of the Cistercians, with a large red cross on the mantle itself. Interestingly enough, one of the biggest dangers to the Knights Templar was their own desertions. Mm-hmm. They had a tendency, because of the intensity of their life, they had a tendency after a couple years to want to abandon their own order and join other religious orders as contemplatives. Yeah. And so, the ora et labora thing, especially I guess as you get a little bit older as as a knight, and you're not quite in the great shape that you were when you were in your 20s and all that.
Young soldier work.
Yeah, and so you think, well, maybe that the life of a Cistercian might not be so bad, and so actually there are decrees by popes that forbid the Knights Templar from leaving their order to join another order. So you keep up the numbers. In fact, those decrees don't always work. There's one example of one of the knights. His name is Everard de Berne, and he's the third master of the order.
Oh, okay.
And he left to become a monk. So sometimes they got away with this, and sometimes they didn't. So there was always new recruits coming in, and you found very enthusiastic support. The English were very enthusiastic about the Knights Templar and provided many of the knights to this organization. Same thing was also true in Spain, as one can well imagine. The Knights Templar were very much used in the Reconquista, so much so that King Alfonso I of Aragon actually gave a third of his kingdom to the order in order to provide for the knights that were fighting in the Reconquista. That's pretty extraordinary. The central part of Spain today is called Castile, which of course comes from the term Castilla, meaning a castle. And the reason for that was that there were so many castles, many of them Templar castles, in central Spain, defending all the territory that literally inch by inch was taken back in the Reconquista. There were lots of French recruits also. And along with these, many times they brought with them their patrimonies. So if a young man joined the Knights Templar, and he was a wealthy young man, and of course he would take the vow of poverty upon joining the Templars, that money might be given to his family members, might go to a nephew or something like that, but just as possible, that money might well have been given as a patrimony to the Templars either for their use or for their ownership. And so, again, while you're having more recruits coming in, you also have more money coming in order to help supply that with their needs. By the time you get to the Second Crusades, when a king's council was held in Paris in 1147, present at that council were 130 Knights Templar. That's in Paris itself. So we're seeing a tremendous growth of this order. And it's during this crusade that King Louis VII of France specifically asks the Knights Templar to oversee the royal funds, so that as the royal entourage goes on this crusade, the holding and transmitting of funds would actually be done by the Knights Templar themselves, and so they take on another role. See, you can see that this evolution of this order. They take on another role now as bankers and accountants. And so they'll be his royal accountants and bankers for the Second Crusade. But once they've learned how to do these things, then what happens is that, and remember, these are days before double entry bookkeeping. It's still pretty primitive and all. But once they do that, they also learn how to take care of their own funds, because there's a lot of money, and it's a lot of it being transferred back and forth. A lot of it's being spent. As I say, you've got to provide for all the fodder for all those animals, armor, the armorers, the building of fortresses. We'll see later on that they, along with the hospitals, especially the hospitallers, become master architects of really incredible forts and fortresses and castles. And so they have to be able to account for all of the flow of this money. Eventually, other people will ask them to do the same thing, and they, in many ways, will then become the original bankers of Europe. And there. Now, not everyone is happy with them, and especially back in Europe, local bishops are not real happy with them. The reason is because they're coming in and doing fundraising on their own. They have the authority, because they're a papal order. They have the authority and the ability of going into a diocese without asking the permission of the bishop and doing a fundraising. And bishops don't like that for obvious reasons. They like to have some control over all of these things, understandably. They also had the ability to break interdicts. So that if, let's say, a bishop had a problem with a particular city, a disobedient whole city, he could put an interdict on that city where no mass or no sacraments would be celebrated. Well, that's a pretty powerful persuasive tool. But the Knights Templar had the ability to continue on within their own house, their sacraments, and to administer those sacraments to outsiders. So that undercuts the authority of the bishop once again. And when we remember the Avignon papacy and the centralization of authority, that's one of the big criticisms of the Avignon papacy, was the undercutting of the authority within local dioceses of the ordinaries there. And we can see sort of an early example of that happening. They could open their own churches. They had their own priests that would administer the sacraments. And another very powerful thing, they could bury the dead within their own cemeteries. Not only members of the order, but also benefactors. And this becomes a very important thing. People, certainly in medieval Europe, but I think it's also true today, want to be buried in holy ground.
Yes.
They love to be buried close to saints. In fact, outside of Baghdad, there's one of the largest cemeteries in the world, and it goes on for miles. It's huge because Muslims, I think they're Shiites, want to be buried next to some of the Shiite martyrs of the early Middle Ages who were buried there, and so it's a big deal to be buried in that cemetery, just like. In the Middle Ages, it was a big deal to be buried near to a church. Therefore, you had the churchyards being used as cemeteries, or being buried in a a convent or monastery walls where the monks every day at Mass and prayer pray for the dead and their benefactors, and so you know that you'll be prayed for every day. And so it was true of the Templars also. They built a grand headquarters in Paris. It was called the Villeneuve de Temple, and it stood until the French Revolution. It was just torn down as late as the early 1790s, and had a double donjon, so it had a double inner courtyard to it. It was just absolutely phenomenal. Along with that, they also had 53 other major fortifications throughout the Holy Lands. These were everything from castles. Later on, we're going to talk about castles. I want to talk a little about just the dimensions of these things. These were the aircraft carriers of the Middle Ages. They really were. They served the same purpose, to intimidate an enemy, and to protect a people. Just incredible. And then all the way to the point of being just fortified safe havens for pilgrims. Mm-hmm. So along the road to Joppa, for instance, every 10 or 15 miles, you'd have just a fortified safe haven, just a house where the pilgrim could stay overnight and be safe. By the 1180s, there were some 600 Knights Templar. So this is less than a century. You go from 4 to 600, and along with that, some 2,000 sergeants. These are, when we mean sergeants, it's a medieval term for foot soldiers. And these were just in the Holy Lands themselves.
Oh.
So you also had other Templars that were outside. For instance, in Europe, there were around 800 houses. And most of these were not fortified. Some of them were, but, certainly when you needed to, you did. But they were houses oftentimes in port cities. So we're talking about a storefront. Literally, in some cases they were warehouses. Docks would be owned by the Knights Templar, and these ran from Palestine over in the east, and they had houses from Palestine all the way through the islands of the Mediterranean, Cyprus and Crete and smaller islands, all the way to Italy itself and several of the major port cities in Italy, all the way into France, particularly the southern part of France, and then into Spain.
Wow.
And some of these houses go all the way through France, all the way into England, all the way north, even into the Scottish lowlands, so around Glasgow, and over into Ireland. They even had a house. They had 12 houses in Ireland. One of them was in Donegal. You can't get any further away from Jerusalem and still stay in Europe than Donegal.
Right.
It's a beautiful area, but really rugged. Rugged part of Western Ireland. They had various ranks of brothers. The highest rank in the Knights Templar was the knight himself. The clergy were separated from that, so priests were not permitted to use weapons and to shed blood. So their purpose was specifically as spiritual directors, and so is that you had the knights themselves, clergy off to the side. Below the knights would be the sergeants or the foot soldiers, and then below that would be the esquires.
Okay.
And then you had a whole other rank below that, and these are non-combatants. All the others, the knights, the sergeants, the esquires could all be involved in fighting. The clergy were not, but then there was another group, and they fell into two categories. One was called the Frères Casalieux, and that roughly translates as the rural brothers.
Okay.
So these are going to be people who are going to basically be farming. So these are farmers, peasant farmers, who are part of the Knights Templar, and their service is to
help take care of the knights.
Yeah, help take care of the knights, to feed them, to take care of the orchards, the grains, all that. Then there's another known as the Frères de Métier, and they're roughly translated as the household brothers. And these are the ones who are literally going to be the housekeepers for the houses and for the stables. Don't think of these guys as being butlers. No. These are economes. They're the guys who are running the house. So they're the ones telling the knights what to eat and making sure it's in front of them. In many ways...
they may have had more control than a lot of people, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a great... remember that great story that Pope John the 23rd had about his rise from being an associate pastor. Remember, he said, well, when I get to be pastor, I'll be the master of my destiny. Then he realized there was a bishop, and then when he became a bishop, he said, I'll be the master of my destiny, well, and there's a pope. And then he says, now I'm the pope. And there's a little nun that tells me what to do all the time. By and large, the Knights Templar were in many ways closer to their secular order, to the second estate, than they were to the first estate. They, by and large, had very little formal education. They were not set aside to go to school and learn Latin grammar. Their object was much more practical. The only areas where they were actually schooled, where they were actually solidly trained, was in bookkeeping and in husbandry. The raising of cattle. Interestingly enough, even they had reading during meals, like all religious orders had at the time.
Right.
But they complained about the fact that the readings were Bible readings.
Okay.
But they complained about the fact that it was in Latin.
Oh.
And so the order had to have translators come in and translate it into medieval French so that the knights could understand it.
What was
That's a clear sign that they are not
schooling was
schooled.
not.
Yeah. Well, here's some interesting stuff about them, little tidbits.
Yeah.
They were beef eaters. It was mandated that they had to eat beef at least 3 times a week.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, tough.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Yeah, this is at an age when beef was, not what was for dinner. And but the whole idea was there was just a raw understanding. They didn't understand calories or anything like this, but they had a raw understanding that eating that red meat made them stronger for fighting. Just knew that somehow. And so, they just kind of did that. They are a very different order from the second military order that I'd like to take a look at.
Okay.
And these are the Hospitallers of St. John. What an interesting group. They started out before the Crusades. They actually pre-existed before the Crusades, but of a very different nature. They were put together by a group of merchants from the Italian city of Amalfi. It's a southern port city. There's not much there today. It's a little village, but at one time it was a major port city, but it suffered, I believe, a tsunami, either a tsunami or a hurricane that destroyed the city and just never really recovered. But during the Middle Ages, it was a big one, and it was one of the most important port cities for pilgrims to come. Remember, we talked in terms of the third way that the Crusaders came down the Italian peninsula. Rented ships and then went over now to Constantinople. Well, this was an old tried and true way of pilgrims going down to Italy, getting onto these ships, and then being shipped across the Mediterranean to the Holy Land. And so it was in the interest of the Amalfi merchants that pilgrims have a decent experience in Jerusalem. But also, we have to keep in mind that these were devout Catholics. These merchants were doing this; they were making money, but at the same time, they were also expressing their religious faith by sponsoring these pilgrimages.
Sure.
It's not unlike what is done by travel companies today, who specialize in pilgrimages. Yeah, they're going to make some money off of it. That's what they do for a living. But there's also, if you get the chance to talk to some of these guys, they are highly motivated out of religious drive. They want people to be able to see these sites and to be there in these sites.
Right.
And again, my own experience of a couple weeks ago at Lourdes, that was not Disneyland.
Right.
That was a religious experience, and some of it is just not, you can't articulate the experience itself. But these travel people know this and understand this. And so the Amalfi merchants, if we could put ourselves into their minds, and even more so into their souls, we know that they have this very strong sense that they want to have a full pilgrim experience. And so they actually bought a house in Jerusalem. The merchants did. They pooled their money, they bought a house, and it's called St. Mary of the Latins.
Okay.
And there, the pilgrims, and especially the poor pilgrims who could not afford to stay at the nice places, they could go and they could stay there. And this was an important site in Jerusalem itself. It's believed to be the site of the angel's announcement of the pregnancy of St. Elizabeth.
Oh.
Okay. So remember, okay, the dual annunciations that take place
Yes.
in Luke, and this is believed to be that house. It's known as the House of St. John. Okay. Several of these merchants and people who they were attracted to this particular enterprise decided to stay in Jerusalem, and there to care for these people in this hostelry, okay? And what they did was they began taking on the rule, a religious rule, and basically adopted the rule of the Augustinians. And then one in particular was the head of this household. Now, basically what you're having now is a monastery with a hostelry attached. And the leader of this was a Brother Gerard. And he ran that hostelry for 40 years.
Oh, wow.
Now, the interesting thing is that the site of that hostelry, or that hospice, actually goes back to 603 A.D.
Wow.
When a similar house was founded by none other than Pope St. Gregory I, the Great. So you've got a lot of history here. And what happens is that he gives hospitality, of course, through, but after 1099, with the coming of the Crusaders, they're looking for any friendly face in Jerusalem, as you can imagine. And there they find Brother Gerard and his hospice there. Now, actually, they had experienced Brother Gerard and his hospice a little bit earlier. What happened is this. I had mentioned to you before that the Fatimids had run all the Christians out of Jerusalem in preparation for the siege of Jerusalem in 1099, all except for one small group.
Oh, that's right.
These were the brothers.
Oh.
And what they did was the brothers realized that the Crusaders were in pretty bad shape. Not only did they forget to bring their siege material, but they were also short on food and water. They couldn't do anything about the water for them, but what they did was, this is so great, they baked up loaves of bread, but they did it in the form of rocks. And so the brothers went to one of the walls, and they stoned the Crusaders. And the Muslim defenders are thinking, oh, those Christians, they're on our side. Well, they're stoning them with bread. And so the Crusaders were able to eat. Now, Godfrey de Bouillon was one of the recipients of one of those stone breads. Yeah. Kind of remind you of the first temptation of Christ, turning stones into bread.
Right. Oh,
You know.
that's great.
Or, as the pastor at my parish mentions, sometimes I try to make bread myself. And he mentioned to the congregation one time, he said, "Oh, yeah, Father Witt's very clever. He can turn bread into stone." Well, regardless of all of
He made
that.
bread very often. You know, it's not too difficult.
Yeah. Anyway, they succeeded. They succeeded in this ruse. They succeeded in staying in Jerusalem during the siege. They succeeded in beating the besiegers through all of that. And so when the First Crusade came to an end, and Brother Gerard was there, obviously he became very interested in setting up now a bigger network of these pilgrimages, so that more people could come to visit. And eventually, Gerard left Jerusalem, went around, and founded 7 associated hospices in France, in southern France, and in Italy, with the intention of helping people, pilgrims, particularly poorer pilgrims who could never have been able to afford this, to come to Jerusalem. Now, just as, even to this day, the Hajj is one of the great events of a Muslim's life, to be able to go to Mecca even once, and they make great sacrifices in order to do that. Well, so it was with Christians trying to get to Jerusalem. And typically the way that they would go is that they would go by way of coming down Italy to Apulia, take a ship to Greece, and then take roads to Constantinople, then cross over the Bosphorus to Anatolia, make their way down the Crusaders' path down to Jerusalem. This was very slow and very dangerous. And so Brother Gerard and the Amalfi merchants had come up with a new route that was going to save time and be much safer, and that was for pilgrims to work their way through the 7 hospices to get down to Jerusalem, to Amalfi, and then from there to take a ship from Amalfi all the way to Jaffa, and then in a protected way to Jerusalem, make their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, the Holy Land, and then safely be able to be brought back to their homeland. This was so popular that at one point in the city of Marseille in southern France, the town council actually limited the number of pilgrims who would be allowed to go to 6,000 a year because there were so many. It overwhelmed their whole warehouse docking system. So it was that big of a deal. Now, along with that, the hospitalers then realized that not only could you transport people, but you could transport stuff. And so as a result, they got involved in the import-export business in a way that Europe had not seen since the days of the Roman Empire. It's in 1113 that Pope Paschal II established the Hospitallers of St. John as an order. And with that, Brother Gerard then began recruiting members, and he recruited members from the Crusaders who, like the Templars, had not gone back home. And so some of these monks, or some of these knights who had come as laymen, and for one reason or another decided that staying in the Holy Land was what they wanted to do with their life, rather than go back to whatever they were doing back in Europe. Some of them decided then to stay instead in the Holy Land. Some of them joined the Knights Templar. Some of them joined the Hospitallers. Okay. 2 religious orders, 2 very different kinds of approaches. But actually, the Hospitallers began a protection service for their pilgrims even 7 years earlier than Hugh de Payne had started his. Brother Gerard died in 1120. And he was succeeded by one of those knights, a man by the name of Raymond Dupay. And now the order itself changes from being hospitalers, or the term hospital itself is closer to a hospice, providing hostel service. Now more into a military direction. and they begin using themselves not just as guards, but also they're used in the Battle of Ascalon. They're actually used in battle there. So it was a pitched battle. They were used as a military unit. They did so well that they were invited to come to Spain, and some of them, as early as 1030, are going to, 1130, I'm sorry, are going to be in Spain as part of the Reconquista. So they'll also be involved in that. And then by 1040, the superior now is no longer going. 1140, yeah, is no longer going to be called prior, but rather master. So there's a clear military sense, and so this is an order that kind of backs into the military, as opposed to the Knights Templar, which were founded specifically for that purpose. And then they're going to be asked to fortify a town in southern Israel called Beth Gibbelin, which they do, and with that they begin introducing themselves to architecture, to military architecture, and the fine development of fortifications as a science take off. And really, they're going to have a tremendous influence on castle building in Europe. You know, these guys right here. Well, St. John's expanded, and it went beyond St. Mary's Monastery. They actually took over the courtyard of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and established a huge dining hall. It was one of the wonders of the Middle East at the time. This was a freestanding refectory that was 120. I want to check that out. I have yards here. I think it's 120 feet. 120 feet wide and 240 feet long. We're still looking at about, what, 2/3 the size of a football field? Or something like that, yeah. They also opened up houses in Acre, in Saint-Gilles, in Aragon. Raymond de Pay was the master of this order for 38 years. And by the time he died, the Hospitallers were transformed into a true military order. So I think next time around, as we gather again, I'll say some more things about the Templar, or the Hospitallers themselves, and then we'll move into the Second Crusade and how after the fall of Edessa in 1144, you have all throughout Europe, and particularly by St. Bernard of Clairvaux, a call for a crusade to rescue the Crusaders of the First Crusade, or at least the descendants of the First Crusade.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. This has been a very wonderful reminder. I think we had one time talked about the Knights Templar before.
Yes, we did.
And so it's good to hear that again, especially as it's so current. And the Hospitallers. I didn't remember too much about them.
Yes.
So thank you, Father.
Okay.
Shall we close today with a prayer?
So, glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
May Almighty God bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you, Father.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.